So let's jump to another part of the shelf we're talking about, the British shelf. Can I ask Mr. Michael Toland to join me up here? Where is he? There he is.
Just behind you.
Michael Toland, jumping my back. Mr. Toland is from the industry in Britain. He's the Economics Director for Oil and Gas UK, which is, I'm sure, a not very easy job, as he handles the relations of the British sector, the British industry, with Her Majesty's Treasury, the Oil and Gas Authority, the Department of Energy and Climate Change, and I'm sure several other agencies. Michael Toland was part of the Wood Review that many of you will know, the baseline study, if I may, that caused a lot of change in Britain. It changed the regulatory system. It led to the creation of the Oil and Gas Authority, which is a newcomer in Britain. So Michael Toland has had his hand very, very deeply into some very fundamental changes in the British system. And just for the record, before joining Oil and Gas UK, Mr. Toland worked 20 years for Shell. So the next 15 minutes are yours. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much indeed. What I'd like to do is pick up on that. I'm very grateful for the introduction because it took a few things out of my talk, which gives me more space. So from WoodMac, we've been hearing some interesting things on our competitiveness and change. And indeed, I had the pleasure of meeting Benton Noland, 2 years ago now with Syrian Wood, as we were thinking how we solve some of the problems that indeed the UK has been facing as a mature industry, and one which sits probably, it's got a bigger scale than Denmark, but my goodness, we wish for the scale that clearly Norway has at the minute. I learned a while ago that what we see in barrels, they see in cubic meters, so it's the same number, but unfortunately, it's about 6.2 times bigger in Denmark, in Norway, sorry. So, as was also mentioned, Oil and Gas UK, we've been around as a trade association for over 40 years now. We these days have more than 500 members. Most of them are actually in the supply chain. So when we talk about people feeling the pain, many companies that are members of ours feel the pain on a daily basis. It's not just the oil and gas companies, but those providing the goods and services. And there's still an industry which does a lot in and for the UK economy. Alas, we don't pay anywhere near as much tax as maybe Bent would like us to pay, or indeed as our finance minister would like us to pay, but we're doing a lot in exports, and that's part of our economic proposition. What I'd like to try and do is pick up on 5 thoughts about what we're doing and how we could contribute to the debate both this afternoon and how we can get to 2020 in a better way than might otherwise be the case. And the first picture I put up on the screen is just a caricature, but a real one of what our industry is going through at the minute in the UK. The cash flow after tax for our industry was last year negative. So we were spending more as an industry than we were earning once we paid our tax bills and managed our investments. And that is a pretty uncomfortable place to be in. And so one of my first suggestions, if you try and get the things and thinking right for 2020, by which time WoodMac say the oil price will be back to $90 or so, and we'll all be cheerful again, is to think, first of all, to recognize what your symptoms really are. And for us, they were a combination of maturity and new investment, and high costs because, again, of the maturity that indeed WoodMac highlighted, and some symptoms on top of that. We've seen operating costs since 2011 rise by 30%. We've seen production fall by 30%. And for those of you that are quick on the maths, that means that unit costs have risen dramatically, 70 and in some cases 80% over the last 4 years. We've seen a wave of investment which didn't happen for much of the 2000s start to happen after 2008 and after some tax changes which started to shake down the regime. And that wall of investment, which in 2013 and 2014 rose to more than $20 billion per year of investment, has indeed seen a wave of new developments coming, most of which are not yet in production. But that also meant that the industry is still paying for those investments at the same time as we now see oil prices fall And so indeed, yes, the revenues are very tight, and indeed, in some cases, very, very difficult indeed for companies within the industry. So, as I say, the first thing in trying to solve our way out of this is to recognize the problems, the diagnosis that we have, and get the diagnosis right. High cost, poor production performance have been part of the problem. For us, the good news is we are beginning to address those things. I'll come back to the cost mix in a minute. But on the production side, 2015 is likely to be the first year in 15 years when we see production improve on the UKCS. And that feels damn good after so many years of watching it fall 10, 15, and even in some cases 20% a year. You know, there's a phrase in the finance industry, you can't catch a falling dagger. And it's felt like that. We've turned it around, though, partly because of the investment over the last years. Much has gone into brownfields, partly because of change in mindset post-Macondo on how you manage assets, and a recognition that, I'm afraid, even at lower oil prices, people operate facilities, I would observe, much better even than at high prices, because if a barrel's important at $100, dear God, a barrel is really important at $50, because it may be the life or death of that company as you produce it. So that focus on production excellence, safety, integrity has worked through the system and is beginning to pay off in production. I'd also say it's not all doom and gloom. Despite the pain on costs, we're also beginning to see some new developments come through, but there's a lot in the wings that we'd like to see come through that are stuck. The claim development that Maersk is leading is a very exciting development, but there are more facilities in the wings which we'd love to see the investment in if we can get things right. So if recognizing the problem is our first thing to do, the second one is to start to think how we manage external risks. And I'd point to four major risks here. We've already had a discussion around the price risk, and certainly for me it feels like lower for longer is the song of the day. It doesn't feel like 2008 because by the time we blinked, the oil price was back up again, and the bad behaviors that everyone moaned about never got sorted out. Feels much more to me, certainly in the UKCS, like the 1990s. Low prices, low taxation, I would say, in some cases, which was an interesting theme, and a very different attitude. You started to see consolidation. You started to see low-cost operators coming onto UKCS. So, you know, it feels like a different place, and the price risk is something that we have to accept and live with. That is part of our business. Fiscal risk. As mentioned, I hold a job which amongst trade associations around Europe is almost unique. I have a whole department designed to fight Treasury. That is the wrong way to work. We're gradually moving to one where we're working with Treasury, not least because of the Wood Review. But so much of our history, as Woodmac showed, and as many of you know, has been governed by volatility in tax rates. And with volatility comes an additional risk premium, which means you have to compete harder for investment. We're moving through that now. The Treasury over the last years, and particularly post the Wood Review and a lot of rethinking by government, has recognized that tax rates have to go down as the industry matures because materiality is a big issue. As the value of opportunities diminishes pre-tax, so if you want to attract those funds post-tax, then I'm afraid the take has to change. And I know it's something that may be unpalatable for Norway, but I see they sit some years behind us, but I see that as an almost irresistible journey to make at some point if you wish to maximize recovery and gain the maximum value for the whole of society from those opportunities and resources. I'd also say that things haven't stopped. So we've seen the tax rate move from 62% down to 50% for new developments, and lower because of investment incentives under certain circumstances. But it's only a decade ago when our highest tax rates for new developments was 33%. You only paid corporation tax. If you look now, the returns in the UKCS of investment in the UKCS is very much poorer than indeed for manufacturing or the service sector in our economy. Some of that can be sorted out if the oil price explodes, but not for long because costs will follow and we will be in the wrong place again. So for us to be in the right place as a mature industry, tax rate changes will need to continue so that materiality improves as the maturity goes on. I'd also say that there's some very interesting discussion still in the UK about the Norwegian solution for exploration. That there, when Norway back funds exploration, works for them at very high tax rates. As the tax rate goes down, the amount of tax relief you get is much less. So much more difficult space to play in. Treasury is trying to find solutions. The government's trying to work with us, and the OGA also, the Oil and Gas Authority, but a very difficult space for us. So first of all, I say, recognize the problems and then begin to manage the external risks. Price risk, fiscal risk, regulatory risk. We've done some great things in the UK now to improve better resource and staff up the Oil and Gas Authority. It's still work in progress. The legislation is still going through to give it the powers it needs. But it is a new kid on the block, and it's doing some good things already, trying to think about the northern North Sea and how, if we are to lose some infrastructure, what is the critical infrastructure, and how we avoid the domino effect where everything falls around our ears. And I'd also say, as we need to manage risks, it's not just regulatory risks in the UK, but indeed for us, regulatory risks which emerge from Brussels are part of that challenge to make sure we understand how we have a successful industry that is environmentally responsible and safely operated, but performs as best it can in a very difficult set of circumstances. And so my third step will also be to look inwards at ourselves and address our internal challenges. Already over this year, we've seen costs coming out of the system like mad. And by the end of next year, the costs running our existing fields will be some 20 to 25% lower than they were at the start of this year. So some big changes in the cost base for the basin. The question, though, is whether that's enough and can we do more? And again, it feels to me a little bit like back to the 90s again, because many of the things I used to do as an engineer in Shell about standardization and doing things, learning from the refinery sector, which was low margin, high turnover, something we're close to now, those ideas got put aside as the oil price took up. Now it's recognized we need to get back and reinvent those behaviors. And as Oil and Gas UK, we're working very closely with all of our membership, both supply chain and operators, to try and promote efficiency improvements across the sector and be a learning repository and help drive performance improvement. We have a task force, one of my colleagues in the room is actually running for us, focusing on standardization, on behaviors and processes, all of which can try and embed the collaborative mindset we need to do and the highest quality of performance we need in what is, at the minute, in the UKCS, a low-margin, high-turnover industry. And my fourth one, then, in this building of ours, is actually to cooperate and collaborate. We need to work together on the challenges we face. One of the big themes of the Wood Review was indeed collaboration. It's not an easy language to our sector. And it's interesting, Serene Wood, a guy who's built a massive company that is a global company, the FTSE 250 for us in the UK, a big company. He's not an engineer. His degree was in psychology. And he built a successful business out of understanding people and understanding minds and how to make a value proposition. And that's a skill that he wants to try and infect the industry with, and it's one we want to learn from, not least as we sit in the business where it is now, where the challenges are people, not the technology, not the costs. We can get the right costs right, we need the right mindset, the right people, and indeed then we can do the right things. I think my final plea would, we need to be open to change, and we need to be bold. As an industry, we have an ambition not just for 20 or 30% cost reduction, but for transformative solutions on the UKCS. It means trying to find ways to bring the supply chain right up close to the operator and sit in that space which till now the operator is regarded as his kingdom, not the space of the supply chain. It means to take new thinking into what is indeed old problems. Too many things I see now were things we started 20 years ago, put on the shelf and need now to finish. Standard solutions for standard problems. Everything is different, I know, but no standard solution for standard problems means you get 70 or 80% of the recovery you could do, but it's half the cost. Now, at that point, you have a solution. So thinking radically differently about things will be fundamental to the future of the industry for us in the UK, and I'd like to think for those in Denmark and indeed in Norway that they can learn from some of the ideas that we have. I'd make it very personal. I have two daughters, and like any father, you're proud of your daughters. One of them I know is a lost cause to the industry, though the delight of my eye. The other one, equally the delight of my eye, in case she ever watches this film, is she actually wants to be a geophysicist. And so my challenge is to hope that I can pass on an industry which is still successful in the UK, is successful in Denmark, and indeed successful in Norway, so that she has a career, and goodness knows the generations after her also, because there are still the resources on the UKCS. From where we look, we have more than 20 billion barrels, I'm afraid they're barrels rather than cubic meters of opportunity. The government's trying to help fund new exploration activity at the minute to break open new ideas, new opportunities, and we need to find ways to crack that resource space. Cheap and effective on the existing stuff, we need to be boring. An engineering company needs to be boring to do things, but there's still the excitement of breaking into the frontier areas as well. So, as I say, for us, I think there are 5 steps. Recognize a problem, think a bit about how we manage those risks better, and address our own internal challenges so we can be healthy and competitive, indeed, in 2015, when oil prices are back to the 90s. In years, alas, not dollars. Cooperate and collaborate. Find ways to work with people. Before now, we wanted to stand on the heads off, but rather now we need to work with them instead to create value together. And indeed, be open, be bold, because there's still an industry out there and a lot to do, because the oil and gas will be needed in the decades ahead. We can't manage all we need to do as a society without it. Thank you very much indeed.